$1 million funeral. Check this shit out.
A funeral. This was a cartel boss getting buried like royalty, and the Mexican government had to deploy an army just to make sure his own funeral didn't turn into a war zone. Today, we breaking down exactly how much the Jalisco New Generation cartel spent to bury their leader. And trust me, these numbers gonna shock you. Starting things off with Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, better known as El Mencho, because this man wasn't just any cartel leader. He was the head of the most powerful criminal organization in Mexico. And when he died, his funeral became a display.
Oh yeah, I forgot to mention. I'm starting something new on my channel. You guys should check it out. It's called Real Talk Sessions with Sean G. I'm doing. If you know anybody, you have a loved one, a family member, a friend, a girlfriend, a boyfriend, a mother, a father, a cousin, a brother, whatever, right? Or just a good friend or somebody you just know, and and they're suffering from addiction problems. Please, maybe I can help because I'm not a doctor, I'm not a therapist, I'm not saying that, but I am somebody who's lived a life for over 20 years, for close to 20 years, sorry, close to 20 years. I've seen it all. I've like sold drugs. I used drugs, unfortunately, for you know what I mean. For like a lot of my life, I was involved in the street life. You know what I mean? Not homelessness, but like you know what I mean. Street life. When I say street life, I mean selling drugs and doing drugs. Just involved in that like criminal lifestyle. You know, something I'm not proud of, but I'm trying to turn my negativities, my negative life into a positive. Because for when it comes to addiction and addicts, I know how they think. I know how they feel. I know what they're gonna do. I know what they're gonna say. So if you have a loved one that's dealing with that, and you need some, you need a honest perspective from somebody who's lived a life and judge and who's going to sit back and listen and then try to offer some solutions, please email me at SHAUNGIBSON828 at gmail.com. That's Sean Gibson 828 at gmail.com. Or you can call me at 236-622-7610. I'm doing something called quick conversation, a real time. That's 15 minutes for $20, and I'm also offering 30-minute conversations, real talk conversations, for $50. If you sounds like something you might be interested in, please email me at, like I said, Sean Gibson 828 at gmail.com, or call me at 236-622-7610. All right, let's get to the program. Thanks, guys.
Wealth that shocked even government officials who thought they'd seen everything. Those who don't know who El Mencho was, this man built the Jalisco New Generation cartel from the ground up into a billion-dollar empire that controlled drug trafficking routes across multiple countries. Born in 1966 in Michoacan, Mexico, El Mencho started as a small-time avocado farmer who got involved in marijuana cultivation before eventually taking over what would become the CJNG. But calling him just a drug dealer would be like calling Jeff Bezos just a book salesman. This man was running a multinational criminal corporation. El Mencho's nickname, El Señor de los Gallos, the Lord of the Roosters, came from his involvement in
The Lord of
cockfighting,
the
which is where a lot of his
Roosters.
early money came from before he moved into drug trafficking. The rooster became his symbol, his trademark, and
They said he used to bet up to $100,000 on a cockfight. Like, pause on that name, but you know, no Diddy, but that's what rooster fights or whatever you want to call them, right? Not so suspect, but yeah, that's why they call him the Lord of the Roosters. He used to bet up at $100,000 at a time sometimes. This is when he turned into a boss, obviously.
When the CJNG put hits out on people, they would often leave rooster feathers as calling cards. That's why that giant rooster made of roses at his funeral wasn't just decoration. It was a symbol of his entire criminal empire. By the time of his death, El Mencho had a $10 million bounty on his head from the DEA, making him one of the most
$15
wanted
million.
men in the
$15
world.
million.
His cartel controlled trafficking routes from South America through Mexico and into the United States, moving cocaine, fentanyl, methamphetamine, and heroin worth billions of dollars annually. But more than that, the CJNG had become known for their extreme violence and their willingness to go to war with both rival cartels and the Mexican government itself. What made El Mencho different from other cartel leaders was his military-style approach to organized crime. While other cartels focused mainly on drug trafficking, El Mencho built the CJNG into a paramilitary force with armored vehicles, helicopters, and weapons that rivaled what many national armies possess. His organization didn't just sell drugs, they controlled territories, collected taxes from businesses, and operated like a shadow government in areas of Mexico where the official government had little control. The man was also known for his intelligence and strategic thinking. Unlike flashy cartel leaders who loved attention in social media, El Mencho stayed in the shadows, rarely being photographed, and almost never making public statements. He let his actions speak for themselves, and those actions included declaring war on rival cartels, attacking Mexican military convoys, and building a criminal empire that generated an estimated $50 billion annually at its peak. Now let's move on to March 2nd, 2026. Because that's the day that changed everything for the CJNG and set the stage for what would become the most expensive cartel funeral in Mexican history.
Let's check it
According
out.
to Mexican intelligence sources, El Mencho had been suffering from kidney failure for several months before his death. The man who had evaded capture for over a decade, who had survived multiple military operations designed to take him down, who had built one of the most powerful criminal organizations in the world, was ultimately taken down by his own failing health. The official report states that El Mencho died of natural causes related to complications from chronic kidney disease. But here's what really got people's attention. He didn't die in some remote mountain hideout or underground bunker like you might expect. According to sources close to the investigation, El Mencho died in a private medical facility in Mexico City, where
That's
he had been
cap.
receiving dialysis treatment under a false identity. The discovery of his body wasn't immediate. For about 48 hours after his death, even Mexican authorities didn't know that
That's cap. I'm just gonna say that's cap. They got like apparently they got fucking video or pictures of, and they checked the DNA. It was really elemental that they killed in the operation a week or two ago. Just saying.
most wanted man in their country was dead. The medical facility where he died had been treating him under the name Carlos Ramirez, and it wasn't until his fingerprints were processed through the system that authorities realized they had the body of El Mencho. What really shocked investigators was how the body was discovered. A routine inspection at the medical facility led to the identification, but by that time, CJG operatives had already begun making arrangements to claim the body. Mexican later revealed that the cartel had a detailed plan in place for exactly this scenario. They knew their leader was dying, and they had prepared for his death months in advance. The Mexican government faced an immediate dilemma. On one hand, they had finally gotten their hands on one of the wanted criminals in the world. They El Mencho's death could trigger a violent succession war within the CJNG, and how they handled his body could influence whether that transition would be peaceful or bloody. Intelligence reports from that time indicate that within hours of El Mencho's death being confirmed, CJNG operatives began mobilizing across multiple Mexican states. Phone intercepts revealed conversations about bringing the boss home and preparing for the biggest event in cartel history. The Mexican government realized they weren't just dealing with the death of a criminal. They were dealing with what could become a national security crisis. The location where his body was found also revealed something important about how El Mencho had been living his final months. The medical facility was high-end, discreet, and had been providing treatment to wealthy patients under strict confidentiality. This wasn't some back alley clinic. This was where Mexico's elite went for medical treatment, and somehow El Mencho had been receiving care there while being the most wanted man in the country. Federal authorities later revealed that El Mencho had been using multiple fake identities and had been moving between different medical facilities for months. The kidney disease had severely limited his mobility, which explained why DEA and Mexican forces had been unable to locate him, despite having the most advanced tracking technology in the world focused on finding him. The medical staff at the facility later told investigators that Carlos Ramirez had been a quiet patient who always paid in cash and never caused problems. They had no idea they were treating the leader of Mexico's most violent cartel. When his identity was revealed, several staff members required police protection because they feared retaliation from either the cartel or from rival criminal organizations. But in the case of handling El Mencho's remains, the Mexican government made a decision that shocked law enforcement officials around the world. They chose to release the body to his family rather than keep it as evidence or leverage against the CJNG. According to sources within the Mexican Attorney General's office, this decision wasn't made lightly. High-level meetings were held between military commanders, intelligence officials, and government ministers to discuss the potential consequences of different approaches to handling El Mencho's body. The primary consideration was preventing a violent succession war within the CJNG. Intelligence reports indicated that multiple factions within the cartel were already positioning themselves to take control, and government analysts believed that denying the family access to El Mencho's body could trigger immediate violence, as different groups fought over who had the right to claim his remains. Mexican authorities also faced pressure from El Mencho's family, particularly from his wife Rosalinda Gonzalez Valencia, who was already a powerful figure within the cartel's financial operations. Intelligence intercepts revealed that she had been making direct threats against government officials, promising retaliation if her husband's body wasn't released for proper burial. The decision to release the body came with strict conditions. The family was required to handle all transportation and burial arrangements. The funeral could only be held in approved locations, and Mexican security forces would maintain a visible presence throughout all proceedings. The government essentially told the family, "You can have the body, but we're going to be watching everything you do with it." What really concerned authorities was the intelligence they were receiving about the scope of the funeral planning. Intercepted communications revealed that the CJNG was planning what they called the biggest funeral in Mexican history, and that cartel members from multiple countries were being invited to attend. This wasn't going to be a quiet family burial. This was going to be a massive display of cartel power and wealth. Mexican intelligence also discovered that the CJNG had been planning El Mencho's funeral for months before his death. They had detailed logistics plans, security protocols, and even backup locations in case authorities tried to interfere. The level of organization behind the funeral planning rivaled what governments put into state funerals for heads of state. The transfer of the body from Mexico City to Guadalajara became a massive security operation in itself. Mexican authorities insisted on escorting the hearse with military vehicles, and they established checkpoints along the entire route to prevent ambushes or attempts by rival cartels to steal or attack the funeral convoy. During the transport, intelligence sources reported unusual activity from multiple criminal organizations. Some rival cartels saw El Mencho's death as an opportunity to attack CJNG operations while they were focused on funeral arrangements. Others saw the funeral as a potential opportunity to eliminate multiple CJNG leaders who would be gathering in one location. The Mexican government's decision to allow the funeral also served their intelligence purposes. They knew that El Mencho's funeral would bring together CJNG leadership from across Mexico and potentially from other countries. This gave them an opportunity to identify and track key cartel figures who might otherwise remain in the shadows. And hit that subscribe button right quick before we keep going to break down exactly how the CJNG spent over $1 million to bury their boss like a king. The funeral of El Mencho wasn't just expensive, it was a calculated display of wealth and power, designed to send a message to rival cartels, government authorities, and CJNG members about the organization's continued strength even after their leader's death. Let's start with the venue selection. The CJNG chose Funeraria Funerales La Paz, located in Colonia San Andres, Guadalajara. Now, this wasn't the most expensive funeral home in the city, but it was strategically located in an area where the cartel had significant control. The funeral home itself was a standard facility, but what the CJNG spent to transform it into a shrine for El Mencho was absolutely insane. The flower budget alone was enough to buy multiple luxury cars. According to reports from El Impartial and Mexico News Daily, the cartel ordered multiple Coronas with between 500 and 1,000 white roses each, but that was just the beginning. They also commissioned custom floral arrangements that were more like art installations than traditional funeral flowers. The centerpiece was a giant rooster made entirely of roses with white details, featuring the CJNG initials prominently displayed on top. This wasn't just a floral arrangement. This was a 6-foot-tall sculpture made from thousands of individual roses, each one hand-placed by professional florists who were reportedly paid premium rates for working under such unusual circumstances. The rooster arrangement alone cost an estimated $15,000 to $25,000, not including the security required for the florists who created it. According to Azteca Noticias, the rooster was specifically designed to honor El Mencho's nickname, El Señor de los Gallos, and featured intricate details that made it recognizable as a CJNG symbol from across the room. The craftsmanship involved in creating a realistic rooster from flowers required specialized skills, and sources close to the funeral arrangements revealed that the cartel flew in florists from other cities specifically for this project. But the rooster was just one of dozens of massive ones. Reports indicate there were 20 to 30 large coronas, each containing 500 to 1,000 roses. If we conservatively estimate premium roses in Mexico at $2 to $5 per stem, and factor in the labor costs for arrangements of this size and complexity, the total flower budget was easily between $50,000 and $150,000. One particularly notable arrangement included a message reading, "From a family that will always be grateful," which Mexico News Daily reported was placed prominently near the casket. This arrangement was made entirely of red roses and was designed to look like it was written in blood, a not-so-subtle reference to the violent nature of El Mencho's empire and the loyalty he commanded even in death. The casket itself was another major expense that shocked even experienced funeral directors. While standard Mexican burial coffins cost about 7,500 pesos, approximately $375 according to Statista, El Mencho's casket was reportedly gold-plated and cost somewhere between $5,000 and $15,000. But some sources suggest the casket was even more expensive, potentially reaching $200,000 if it was actually made with significant gold content rather than just gold-plated. The casket featured custom engravings, premium interior fabric, and specialized hardware that made it both a display piece and a functional burial container. Funeral industry sources who spoke anonymously revealed that this type of custom casket typically requires months to create, suggesting that the CJNG had been planning El Mencho's funeral arrangements long before his actual death. Transportation costs were also significant. The body had to be moved from Mexico City to Guadalajara by road.
That's crazy. That fucking all gold casket. That's fucking huge, man. That's like crazy baller, man. He was the biggest cartel kingpin at the time, right? So why not?
Hiring a specially equipped hearse and a security convoy.
Please
that
like,
stretched
share, and
for
subscribe.
miles. The CJNG paid for premium transportation services, including refrigeration equipment to preserve the body during the journey, and specialized vehicles to transport the massive flower arrangements without damaging them. The burial plot represented another major expense. El Mencho was buried in a cemetery in San Juan de Ocotan, Zapopan municipality, in what sources describe as a prime location within the cemetery grounds. Premium burial plots in this area can cost between $10,000 and $30,000, but the CJNG reportedly purchased an entire section to ensure privacy and security for the burial site. But what really drove up the costs were the memorial services and reception arrangements. The CJNG organized food and drinks for hundreds of mourners, including cartel members who traveled from across Mexico and potentially from other countries. This wasn't just a simple reception. This was a multi-day event that required catering services capable of feeding a small army while maintaining the security and discretion required for a cartel gathering. Private security costs were astronomical. While the Mexican government provided military security around the perimeter, the CJNG hired their own security forces to protect the funeral from potential attacks by rival cartels. Sources estimate this private security operation cost between $20,000 and $50,000, including armored vehicles, armed personnel, and communication equipment. What really got Mexican authorities worried was the scale of the security operation required to prevent El Mencho's funeral from turning into a battlefield between rival cartels. According to El Imparcial, dozens of military vehicles and a helicopter patrolled the area during the funeral. This wasn't just a normal police presence. This was a full military deployment involving the Mexican Army, National Guard, and state police. The government essentially treated El Mencho's funeral like a potential national security threat, which it absolutely was. The security perimeter extended for blocks around the funeral home, with checkpoints set up to inspect every vehicle entering the area. Mexico News Daily reported that the security presence was so intense that normal traffic was diverted away from the entire neighborhood for the duration of the funeral proceedings. Intelligence sources revealed that the government had credible threats indicating that rival cartels, particularly the Sinaloa cartel, were considering attacks during the funeral. The opportunity to eliminate multiple CJNG leaders in one location was too tempting for some criminal organizations to ignore. And Mexican authorities knew that any violence during the funeral could trigger a cartel war that would spread across multiple states. The helicopter surveillance wasn't just for show, it was actively monitoring communications and tracking the movement of known cartel members in the area. Government sources later revealed that they identified dozens of high-ranking CJNG operatives who attended the funeral, providing valuable intelligence for future operations against the organization. What made this security operation unique was that the Mexican government was essentially protecting a cartel funeral. They weren't there to arrest anyone or disrupt the proceedings. They were there to make sure the funeral happened peacefully. This represented a pragmatic approach to cartel management that some critics argued was essentially providing government security for criminal organizations.
Totally, man.
The cost of this government security operation was never officially disclosed, but estimates suggest it involved hundreds of personnel and millions of pesos in resources. Helicopter operations alone cost thousands of dollars per hour, and the military deployment involved specialized units that are typically reserved for counter-terrorism operations. To put El Mencho's funeral costs in perspective, we need to look at how much the CJNG typically spent on funerals for regular cartel members. According to documents reported by El Grafico, CJNG expense reports showed they spent about 25,000 pesos, approximately 1,250 US dollars, for the funeral of a low-level sicario nicknamed Muchacho de Choke. This gives us a baseline for what the cartel considered appropriate funeral expenses for rank-and-file members. So for a regular cartel member, the CJNG spent $1,250. For El Mencho, they spent close to $1 million. That's an 800-fold increase in funeral expenses, reflecting not just the leader's importance to the organization, but also the cartel's need to demonstrate their continued wealth and power, even after his death. The comparison becomes even more striking when you consider that many Mexican families spend less on entire homes than the CJNG spent on flowers for El Mencho's funeral. The average Mexican worker makes about $15,000 per year, meaning the flower budget alone represented 3 to 10 years of typical Mexican wages. Based on all the reported details and typical costs for luxury funeral services in Mexico, let me break down exactly where that $1 million went and how the CJNG managed to spend more on one funeral than most people make in a lifetime. Starting with the casket, which was reportedly gold-plated and custom designed specifically for El Mencho. Now a standard Mexican burial coffin costs about 7,500 pesos, which is roughly $375 according to official statistics. But El Mencho's casket was in a completely different category. Conservative estimates put it at $5,000 to $15,000 for a high-end gold-plated casket. But sources suggest it could have cost as much as $200,000 if it contained actual gold rather than just gold plating. The wide range reflects the uncertainty about the exact specifications. But given the cartel's wealth and the symbolic importance of this funeral, the higher estimate is entirely possible. The flower arrangements were where the CJNG really went all out, spending what most people would consider an insane amount of money on something that would only last a few days. The giant custom rooster arrangement alone cost between $15,000 and $25,000, and that was just one piece. They also ordered 20 to 30 massive coronas, each containing 500 to 1,000 premium roses. When you factor in that premium roses in Mexico cost $2 to $5 per stem, plus the specialized labor required for arrangements of this size and complexity, the total flower budget easily reached $50,000 to $150,000. This is more money than many Mexican families see in several years, spent entirely on flowers that would be dead within a week. The funeral home services represented another significant expense, though relatively modest compared to other costs. The CJNG paid between $3,000 and $8,000 for wake and viewing services, body preparation and embalming, transportation coordination, and facility rental with specialized staffing. This covered the professional services needed to handle a funeral of this magnitude, while maintaining the security and discretion required for a cartel event. For the burial plot itself, El Mencho was laid to rest in a prime location within a cemetery in San Juan de Ocotan, Zapopan Municipality. Premium burial plots in this area typically cost $10,000 to $30,000, but reports suggest the CJNG purchased. This wasn't just about buying a grave, controlling the entire area around where their leader would be buried. Transportation costs were also substantial, requiring the movement of El Mencho's body from Mexico City to Guadalajara, along with all the funeral arrangements. The CJNG paid between $2,000 and $5,000 for specialized hearse services, security convoy coordination, and refrigeration equipment to preserve the body during the journey. They also needed specialized vehicles to transport the massive flower arrangements without damaging them. The memorial services and reception arrangements required feeding and hosting hundreds of mourners over multiple days, including cartel members who traveled from across Mexico and potentially from other countries. The CJNG spent an estimated $10,000 to $20,000 on food, drinks, venue rentals, and catering services, capable of handling a gathering of this size while maintaining the security required for a cartel event. Private security represented one of the largest expenses, with the CJNG hiring their own security forces separate from the government military presence. This operation cost between $20,000 and $50,000 and included armed personnel, armored vehicles, communication systems, and coordination with existing cartel security networks. This was necessary because while the government provided perimeter security, the cartel needed their own protection against potential attacks from rival organizations. Finally, miscellaneous expenses included custom memorial items, photography, and documentation of the event, and additional logistics coordination that totaled between $5,000 and $15,000. When you add up all these costs, The conservative estimate ranges from $105,000 to $478,000, but the realistic high-end estimate reaches $500,000 to $1 million,
Wow,
which
that's fucking
explains why this
insane,
became
man.
known as El Mencho's $1 million funeral. The aftermath of El Mencho's funeral revealed as much about the CJNG's future as the funeral itself revealed about their wealth and organization. Within weeks of the funeral, intelligence sources reported increased violence in several Mexican states as different factions within the CJNG began fighting for control of the organization's most profitable territories.
No fuck.
The $1 million funeral, rather than demonstrating unity, may have actually highlighted the wealth that different groups within the cartel were now fighting to control. Mexican authorities used the intelligence gathered during the funeral to launch several major operations against the CJNG. The government's decision to allow the funeral while maintaining heavy surveillance paid off in terms of identifying key cartel figures who had previously remained hidden. Several arrests in the months following El Mencho's death were directly linked to intelligence gathered during the funeral proceedings. The funeral also had broader implications for how cartels operated in Mexico. Other criminal organizations took note of both the scale of El Mencho's funeral and the government's response to it. Some saw this as evidence that cartels with sufficient wealth and power could essentially negotiate with the government about how their operations would be handled.
Please like, share, and subscribe if you're in the chat. Thank you.
International law enforcement agencies also studied the funeral as an example of how modern cartels operate more like corporations than traditional criminal gangs.
This is
The level
wild,
of
man.
planning, organization, and financial resources demonstrated at El Mencho's funeral showed that the CJNG was operating with sophisticated logistics and management capabilities that rivaled legitimate multinational businesses. The cultural impact of El Mencho's funeral extended far beyond the cartel world. In many Mexican communities, particularly in areas where the CJNG had significant presence, the funeral was seen as a demonstration of an alternative power structure that could provide resources and organization that the official government often couldn't match. Social media coverage of the funeral, despite attempts by authorities to limit information, sparked debates about inequality in Mexico. Many people pointed out that El Mencho received a more elaborate funeral than many Mexican presidents, highlighting the wealth disparity between successful criminal
Please like, share, and
organizations
subscribe.
and
Thank you.
legitimate institutions.
If you're in the chat, say what's
The
up.
funeral also reinforced the mythology around El Mencho and the CJNG. Rather than his death diminishing the organization's reputation, the elaborate funeral became part of the legend, potentially to join the cartel or emulate its operations. For families affected by cartel violence, Menchos and Sound, El Mencho's $1 million funeral was a painful reminder of the resources available to criminal organizations. While victims' families
Look at
often
that
struggle
money,
to
man.
afford
Holy
basic
fuck.
burial costs for their loved ones,
I couldn't imagine
the
having
man
that much money,
responsible
man.
for much of their suffering was buried with more luxury than most people could imagine. El Mencho's $1 million funeral represents more than just the elaborate burial of a cartel leader. It demonstrates the incredible wealth and power that modern criminal organizations can accumulate, and the complex relationship between these organizations and the governments that are supposed to combat them. The decision by Mexican authorities to allow this funeral to proceed while providing security for it reveals the pragmatic reality of governing in areas where cartels have significant influence. Sometimes preventing larger violence requires accommodating smaller demonstrations of criminal power. For the CJNG, the funeral served its intended purpose of demonstrating continued strength and wealth, even after their leader's death. But it also exposed the organization to increased government scrutiny and may have contributed to internal conflicts that have weakened the cartel in the months since El Mencho's death. The legacy of this funeral will likely influence how future cartel leaders plan their own deaths and how governments respond to the deaths of major criminal figures. It set a precedent for both the scale of resources that cartels are willing to spend on symbolic displays of power and the level of accommodation that governments might provide to prevent larger conflicts.
Yeah, wow.
When you spend close to $1 million on a funeral, you're not just burying a person, you're making a statement about power, wealth, and the continuation of an organization that operates outside the law, but with resources that rival legitimate governments. El Mencho's funeral showed the world exactly how powerful the CJNG had become.
No shit,
and
man.
that display of wealth and organization will be remembered long after the flowers have wilted and the security forces have moved on to other operations.
Wow, that was something. Everybody, please like, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed the content. Also, if you know anybody that's out there that's suffering from addiction problems, I'm not a therapist, I'm not a doctor, but I have lived a life for about 20 years, and I know how addicts think. I know how they feel. If you know somebody that's suffering from addiction problems, and you want somebody that's not going to judge you, or you know what I mean, that's going to give you an honest, real life perspective from somebody who's lived a life. I know how addicts think. I know how they feel. I know what they're going to do, what they're not going to do. I'm offering 15-minute quick. They're called Real Talk with Sean G conversations. Quick conversation, 15 minutes. A 50-minute conversation, that's $20, and if you want the 30-minute conversation, that's $50. Yeah, like, and I give honest perspective about what I know from the streets. Unfortunately, I lived most of my life in the streets, not homelessness, but like selling drugs and doing drugs, and I know. Like at the back, I know the street life like the back of my hand. So if you know anybody that's struggling with those problems, please email me at shaungibson828 at gmail.com. That's Sean Gibson at 828 gmail.com. Or please call me at 236 622 7610. Thank you very much. Or please leave a comment underneath this and let me know what you think if you're interested. Or just leave me a comment about the video. Appreciate you guys. Take care.